My fence collapsed in seconds. It was smashed apart by a snowplow, hitting it at full speed. Metal shrieked as the blade tore through wire and posts, and before I could even reach the gate, dump trucks were already backing in. They dumped filthy gray snow straight into my pasture like it was a municipal landfill. Salt, slush, road chemicals, everything my livestock couldn't survive. The bulls panicked. Hooves slipped on frozen ground. One slammed into the feed trough. Another bolted, eyes wide, breath exploding into the storm. I yelled until my chest burned, but the engines never slowed. Behind me, my wife stood in the barn doorway, wrapped in layers, shaking not from fear, but from the cold now pouring in. Half the winter shelter was already buried. This was where the herd survived storms, where we survived. Then her red BMW rolled up and stopped inches from the fence. She stepped out, unfolded a paper, and read it calmly like a verdict: emergency winter authority, temporary land seizure, for community safety. Behind her, the bulls went silent, just dark shapes in the snow, all staring at her red BMW. She smiled and said this was only the beginning. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't hesitate. She simply waved her hand and told the drivers to keep dumping. Snow poured in heavier, spreading across my pasture in thick, dirty piles, as if my land had already stopped belonging to me. She stood there, boots spotless, coat untouched by the storm, watching my livestock scatter like it was a scheduled operation. "I'm acting under winter safety authority," she said, flat and rehearsed. "This is about protecting the community. I haven't actually banned." She introduced herself as the HOA president, but she spoke like a regulator, like someone used to issuing orders and expecting compliance. Cold, precise, punitive, the kind of person who didn't argue because she didn't believe arguments were necessary. She claimed the subdivision needed an emergency snow disposal site. Roads had to stay clear, plows needed somewhere to dump, and according to her paperwork, my pasture was now the most efficient solution. Again, what she didn't mention was the contract. A seasonal snow management deal tied to the HOA, mid-seven figures, set to renew every winter if the site stayed operational. The longer my land stayed buried, the more valuable it became to her. I told her this was active ranch land, that animals couldn't survive road salt and chemical runoff, that my family had worked this ground for decades without a single dispute. She looked past me, scanned the herd, then glanced at the barn where my wife stood shivering. "Then you should have adapted sooner," she said. "Winter doesn't wait." And neither, apparently, did she. By the second day, the snow piles were taller than my fence posts. The trucks kept coming. Every few hours, another load of road sludge was dumped into the pasture, spreading outward like a disease. Salt burned through the grass. Ice crusted over the feeding lanes. The bulls refused to approach the troughs now, circling wide, snorting, slipping, unsettled by the noise and the smell. One of the younger bulls went down hard near the runoff ditch. He struggled to get his footing, legs scrambling against frozen mud, until I got a rope under him and dragged him clear. His flank was bleeding where the ice had cut him. Another refused to eat altogether, pacing the fence line, eyes locked on the trucks. I called the number on the side of the plow. No answer. I flagged down a driver and told him this was active cattle land. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He just shrugged and said he was following orders. That afternoon, a notice appeared zip-tied to my gate. Violation: interference with emergency winter operations. Penalty: daily fines pending compliance. I laughed once, sharp and bitter, then tore it down. By nightfall, the temperature dropped again. Wind pushed snow sideways into the barn. My wife and I worked in silence, dragging hay through knee-deep drifts, trying to keep the herd calm. She moved slower than she used to, stopping to catch her breath, hands shaking as she tied the stall doors. "This isn't safe," she said quietly. She wasn't talking about the weather. The letters started arriving the next morning. Certified envelopes, official logos, photos attached close-ups of my fence, my tracks in the snow, my own cattle framed like evidence. According to the HOA, I was obstructing a temporary public safety corridor. According to their timeline, my land had already been designated for emergency use. The wording was careful, polished, written by someone who knew how to sound reasonable while threatening ruin. By noon, a second notice followed. Access restricted. Owner entry prohibited within marked boundaries. They had staked my pasture with bright orange flags overnight, lines drawn through snowdrifts, cutting straight across the winter feeding zone. When I stepped past one, my phone buzzed with an alert, another fine logged automatically. That's when it stopped feeling like a dispute and started feeling like a system closing in. I went to the county website, pulling records on my phone while standing in the cold. The easement file looked wrong. Dates didn't line up. A temporary winter authorization had been added less than a week earlier, backdated, approved without a hearing. Every document pointed back to the HOA. Every email came from the same office. Every warning ended with the same signature line. I finally saw her name in print, clean, centered, stamped at the bottom of every threat. HOA, President. That night, as another convoy rolled in, I watched my bulls bunch together at the far end of the pasture, refusing to move. Steam rose from their backs in the floodlights. Fear does that to animals. It compresses them, makes them watchful, unpredictable. And someone in the HOA was betting on that. The real answer came from a contractor who didn't realize I was listening. He was on the phone by his truck, pacing, complaining about overtime. He said the quiet part out loud about how the HOA deal was a gold mine, about how the site wasn't temporary at all. They needed operational all winter, he said. If it stays active, the contract auto-renews. Big money. That night, I pulled every filing I could find. Buried under emergency language and winter safety codes was the number they never mentioned out loud. $2 wit million. That's what the HOA stood to make, managing snow disposal for the surrounding developments, money routed through shell vendors, maintenance partnerships, and land use conversions that turned private ground into a permanent dumping asset. And that's when I saw the second layer, a parcel map revision, a boundary adjustment. My land shaded differently, reclassified, quietly, as non-agricultural use. I drove to the cemetery the next morning, needing air that didn't smell like salt and diesel. The snow around my son's headstone had been disturbed. Tracks where there shouldn't have been any. The small wooden cross beside the marker, the one we put up after the service, had been snapped clean in half and shoved into a drift. My son had worn a badge. He'd believed in paperwork, in rules, in accountability. Years earlier, he'd filed a report, one complaint too many, about HOA fund misuse. It had cost her a fine, a public reprimand. I stood there in the cold, hands numb, chest tight, finally understanding why this was. This wasn't about snow. This was about settling a score, and she was willing to bury my land, my livelihood, and my family to do it. The county clerk didn't even look surprised. She scrolled through the filings on her screen, leaned back slightly, and asked me one question that made my stomach drop. Did you authorize this winter conversion yourself? I watched her cursor highlight the document. My name was there, my address, my parcel number, and beneath it my signature. Except it wasn't mine. The loops were wrong, the spacing off. Whoever signed it had copied my name the way people do when they've only seen it once. Careful, but rushed, confident they'd never be challenged. This easement bypassed public notice, the clerk said quietly. Emergency authority can't do that, not for land use conversion. She printed the file, stamped it, and slid it across the counter like evidence. Outside, snow fell heavier. Plows roared past the building, headed straight for my place. I called a land use attorney on the drive back. He didn't sugarcoat it. If this holds, he said, they're not just dumping snow, they're converting your land by force, and whoever signed this is exposed. By the time I got home, 2 county trucks were already parked near the gate inspectors. Clipboards out, cameras up. They weren't hostile. They weren't friendly either. They measured runoff paths, took samples from the snow piles, photographed the salt burn creeping toward the creek. One of them pulled me aside. This much road waste on agricultural land violates multiple codes, he said, especially this close to livestock. The word violates hung in the air. That afternoon, the HOA sent another notice, this one colder. Continued resistance will result in asset seizure pending compliance. They weren't bluffing anymore. That night, the temperature plunged. A hard freeze locked the salt into the soil. One bull refused to stand. Another started kicking the stall walls in panic, the noise echoing through the barn. My wife sat on a bale of hay, exhausted, rubbing her hands together for warmth. How far will she go? She asked. I didn't answer because I was starting to realize the truth. She was already past the point where consequences mattered. The evidence spread faster than the snow. I sent the forged filing to a few homeowners. I trusted people who'd complained quietly for years. Retirees, parents, folks who paid their dues on time and assumed someone was watching the money. They started asking questions. Why was a temporary snow site listed as a renewable asset? Why were vendor payments routed through third-party shell companies? Why did the HOA president's personal account receive deposits matching the disposal fees? By morning, the HOA email system lit up. Then it went silent. That afternoon, a notice went out to every resident. Emergency HOA meeting. Mandatory attendance. Weather notwithstanding. The timing wasn't subtle. She knew the filings were unraveling. She knew the county was watching. And instead of backing down, she chose escalation, the kind that forces everyone into the same room. As dusk fell, the plows returned. Louder this time. Closer. I watched from the barn as her red BMW cruised slowly along the fence line, headlights cutting through the snow. She didn't get out. A loudspeaker crackled to life. "This property is under emergency control," her voice echoed across the pasture. "Any interference will be documented." End quote. End quote. The bulls reacted immediately, heads lifting, bodies tightening. Sound carries differently in winter. Low frequencies travel through frozen ground. The noise hit them wrong. I shouted for her to stop. She didn't. She drove the fence line again, speaker blaring, circling like she was daring something to happen, as if provoking chaos would justify what she planned to claim next. My wife grabbed my arm. "Don't," she whispered. "Whatever she's trying to do, don't." I didn't touch the gate. I didn't step forward. I just watched. The bulls stood packed together, breath fogging the air, eyes locked on the moving red shape. Snow fell heavier, muffling everything except the speaker's voice and the grinding engines. Then my phone buzzed. A final message from the HOA. "Tonight, this ends, one way or another." I looked up at the pasture, at the fence, at the car crawling along the line where the snow piles were highest. And for the first time since this started, I realized she wasn't trying to win quietly anymore. She wanted a spectacle. And whatever happened next was going to happen in front of everyone. The community center parking lot was half buried under snow when I arrived. Plows idled along the edges, engines rumbling, lights flashing against the whiteout. Residents rushed inside with collars up and heads down, breath fogging the air. Everyone knew this meeting mattered, but no one said why out loud. She arrived last. Her red BMW rolled in slow and deliberate, tires crunching over packed ice, and stopped exactly where the fence line met the pasture, close enough that the bulls could see it, close enough that I knew she wanted them to. Inside, the room filled fast. Folding chairs scraped, wet coats dripped, the storm hammered the roof. She took the podium without waiting for the agenda. "This emergency session exists for one reason," she said, voice sharp and controlled, "to resolve an ongoing obstruction that threatens public safety." She clicked her remote, maps appeared, my land outlined, shaded, relabeled. "This property is being converted permanently," she said, effective immediately. Murmurs spread. Someone stood. Another shouted. That's when the doors at the back opened. County officials stepped in. Then another man behind them, quiet, composed, badge visible only when he moved. She didn't notice. She was too busy smiling. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I walked to the front and handed the clerk a single folder. She opened it. Her expression changed. The forged easement appeared on the screen, my name beside a signature that wasn't mine. Then the financials. Line after line of transfers. Disposal fees routed through shell vendors. Deposits landing in accounts that didn't belong to the HOA. $2. Wit million. Gasps filled the room. Emails followed. Internal messages. One thread highlighted in yellow, her instructions to keep the site operational at all costs. Then the cemetery photos. Snow-covered ground. Broken marker. The snapped wooden cross beside my son's grave. The room went silent. A county official leaned toward her and asked one question. "Did you authorize these filings yourself?" She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "This is harassment," she snapped. "He's unstable. This is retaliation." "Weiss." That's when the man in the back stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "we're going to need you to stop." Her hand tightened on the podium. Outside, a loudspeaker crackled to life. She bolted, not toward the door, toward the windows. Her voice burst through the loudspeaker outside, sharp and amplified, echoing across the frozen pasture. She shouted orders, warnings, accusations. The sound sliced through the storm, low and aggressive, vibrating through the ground. The bulls reacted instantly. Heads lifted, bodies tightened, breath steamed in unison. She reached her BMW, yanked the door open, and hit the panic button. The alarm screamed. The sound cut clean through the snow and straight into the pasture. I didn't move. I didn't touch the gate. I didn't shout. The bulls surged forward as one. Metal shrieked as the first impact crushed the hood. The windshield shattered under the second. Panels buckled. Tires collapsed. Red paint disappeared beneath snow and muscle and momentum. People poured outside, shouting, phones raised. She screamed. County officers pulled her back as the final blow caved in the driver's side door. When the noise finally stopped, the pasture went still again. Steam rose from the bulls' backs. The agent stepped beside her, cuffs already out. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "you're under arrest." Snow kept falling. The BMW didn't move, and neither did she. The room didn't explode into noise the way people expect after something breaks. It went quiet, heavy, thoughtful, almost respectful. Snow ticked against the windows in small, steady taps. Wet coats steamed. No one rushed to fill the space. Then an older man near the aisle stood and said, "I should have spoken up sooner." Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. That cracked it open. Apologies followed, not as speeches but as gestures, hands on shoulders, nods held a second longer than necessary, eyes finally meeting. A woman I'd only seen at a distance pressed a paper cup of coffee into my wife's hands. Someone draped a blanket around her shoulders. She accepted it without comment, her shaking easing now that the shouting outside had stopped. Through the glass, the pasture lights still burned. The bulls stood calm again, clustered where they always did when wind howled and snow thickened. The panic had drained from them. Order had returned not because anyone forced it, but because the pressure had finally lifted. The remaining board members sat rigid, avoiding eye contact, realizing how small the room felt without the person who dominated it for so long. Phones buzzed in pockets as the same alert reached everyone at once. No one asked me to say anything. For the first time since the fence went down, I didn't feel like I owed the room an explanation. The consequences arrived quickly and without ceremony. A county clerk stepped forward with a sealed packet and read the summary aloud: clean, precise, final. Emergency authority revoked. All land use conversions frozen. The snow disposal contract suspended pending criminal review. A call went through on speaker. The voice on the line didn't raise or soften. It simply listed facts: forged filings, misuse of emergency powers, misappropriation of funds, restitution ordered in full, $2. 8 million traced, secured, and set for recovery. The HOA placed under external oversight effective immediately. New rules followed, each read once and written down. No land designation without verified owner consent, third-party review, and a recorded community vote. No exceptions. No shortcuts. Another official handed me a single-page notice. Immediate restoration of property access. Environmental remediation ordered at HOA expense. Someone asked what would happen to the snow already dumped. "It's being removed," the official said. "Starting now." There was no cheering, just relief deep and quiet. Outside, engines started again. Different trucks this time. Headlights swung away from the pasture, not toward it. Clipboards closed. Samples were sealed. A uniformed officer nodded once in my direction. Not approval, not sympathy, closure. When the room thinned, my wife and I stepped to the window together. Under the lights, crews worked methodically, scraping salt-stained snow into lined containers, sealing it off. Careful now. Regulated, accountable. The fence line was reopened, posts reset, tape removed. The land looked bruised but no longer buried. A volunteer from the county approached with a small wooden box. Inside lay the broken cross from my son's grave, cleaned and wrapped. "We'll set it back tonight," he said. "If that's all right." I nodded. Out in the pasture, the bulls shifted, breath rising in slow clouds, unbothered by the machinery now that it followed rules instead of force. The red BMW was gone, taken as evidence, no spectacle left behind. Just the space it had occupied, already filling with snow. My wife squeezed my hand. "It's over," she said, not as a question. I watched flakes settle into the ruts left by the plows, softening them, one layer at a time. The land didn't need speeches or promises. It just needed to be left alone long enough to heal. I turned off the lights and let the pasture disappear into the storm. Winter tried to bury us, but it only covered the tracks of the people who thought they could. Looking back, the win wasn't what mattered most. It was how close everything came to going the wrong way. If I'd let anger take the wheel, if I'd tried to outshout power with force, this story wouldn't have ended in quiet snow and open ground. It would have ended with regret. What actually changed the outcome wasn't toughness or cleverness. It was slowing down, documenting what was happening, and letting the process do what it's supposed to do when it's given the chance. There's a line I didn't cross, even when it felt personal. Standing up legally isn't the same thing as escalating emotionally. One is deliberate. The other burns hot and leaves scars. I learned early that rage feels productive, but it's sloppy. Evidence is patient. Process is slow, but it holds. When pressure came, I kept my hands off the gate and my voice low. That choice mattered. It kept the story grounded in facts, instead of turning it into a headline for the wrong reasons. If you ever find yourself in something like this, the smartest moves won't feel dramatic. Keep records as you go, photos, dates, copies of filings. Read what's public before assuming what's true. When something doesn't line up, ask questions in writing and let silence work for you. And when the situation grows beyond a neighbor dispute, that's the moment to bring in people whose job is to see patterns you can't while you're living inside it. What holds a community together isn't power or titles, it's restraint. Rules only protect people when they're respected by everyone, including those who enforce them. When they aren't, the damage spreads quietly until someone decides to check it. Out there, beyond the window, the fence stands again. Not as a barrier, but as a boundary that makes sense. And sometimes, that's all peace really is.